recently, a debate was sparked online about whether or not modified bitumen could be called an elastomeric membrane. And one of my colleagues actually reached out to me and wanted to get my take on it. And I thought it's just kind of an interesting concept to explore for everyone. And so first off, I'd like to go over what is elastomeric. Now, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but they all basically go back to two things. The first property of elastomeric that every single source I can find has all agreed on is that in order to be defined as elastomeric, it has to be capable of stretching or being deformed a certain amount and then being able to go back to its original shape. Now, how much that amount is varies. The vast majority of people say multiple times its size. The smallest I've seen so far is 2 times its size. I've seen 3 times. I saw one try to claim that elastomeric should be able to stretch at least 6 times their size. And that was, of course, by a manufacturer that was promoting a product that can stretch 6.5 times its size. But whether you go to the science websites, you go to the engineering websites, you go to the manufacturing websites, you go to the actual dictionaries, everybody agrees it stretches and then retains or goes back to its original shape. And the minimum amount of stretching would be 2 times its original size. The second most common definition I see is the type of polymers inside of it. And now, this one's a bit tricky. Now, both of these are agreed upon. Everybody agrees on the elasticity part. Most people agree about the type of polymers in it. And I think the reason why there's a difference there is because of synthetic rubbers that are elastomeric. One such example is actually TPO. TPO is, by definition, elastomeric. It falls under every one of the criterias. But containing a certain amount of polymers, there seems to be a lot of debate about how much of that material has to contain it. And so I saw an example of this online. I'm going to change it up a bit just to keep it a little bit cleaner. The basic idea being is, at what percent would that matter? Now, let's say you take rubber. Rubber falls under those polymers. The vast majority of it contains that. Everybody agrees that rubber is elastomeric. In fact, going back to the original definitions of elastomeric, it was synonymous with rubber and was used so as such up until a couple decades ago. So let's say you take that piece of rubber, you were to melt down, let's say 10,000 cubic feet worth of asphalt and put in a little 1 inch by 1 inch piece of rubber. Would that now qualify as elastomeric? Well, no. No, everybody agrees on it. Let's try a different strategy for comparison. Okay? You're going to take 1,000 gallons of water. 1,000 gallons of water. You're going to put in 5 drops of hydrogen peroxide. Is it now hydrogen peroxide? No. No, it's not. That's kind of how I feel about that argument. But I'm staying away from the polymer argument specifically because there is no clear guideline that has ever been made on that. And some parties agree to it, some parties don't. But everybody that I can find, any source that is even semi-reliable, or any source that is scientific at any capacity, all agree on the ability to return to its natural shape. And so, does modified bitumen qualify? So let's go over the different ways we can interpret this. So the minimum standard I've been able to find is that it has to be capable of stretching to 2 times its size, at least, and then being able to return to its normal shape. Think about that. You have to be able to stretch it, and then it resumes its shape. Kind of like those toys you buy for your kids, the little sticky hands. Those can stretch. When you throw them, they can stretch 4 or 5 times its length, and they go back to its original shape. That is an elastomeric property. If we go back to that deformation portion and we look at modified bitumen, now there's been a ton of different modified bitumen. The properties of APP, SBS are widely different. But testing, one of the bare minimum testing standards for modified bitumen includes elongation at breaking point. And this is what a lot of the arguments that people are using against defining it as elastomeric are bringing up, is whether or not modified bitumen can stretch at all. So elongation at breaking point is a measure of how long you can stretch that past its original length before tearing it, completely breaking it. Modified bitumen as a whole, as a market, does not have a great elongation. It never has. In fact, even a lot of the adhesives, like the cold application adhesives, usually have an elongation of less than 150%. In fact, I think actually the highest I was even able to find was 110%. But most of the adhesives, and adhesives are almost always going to elongate more than a material will, but these don't qualify for elongation. Not even enough elongation to start discussing whether or not the material can shrink back into place. Looking at modified bitumen, when you go through all the different brands and testing, which they all publish this, every brand out there has technical information sheets, technical data sheets, or product brochures. Every single one of them lists what their testing was for elongation. I've never seen a single brand I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them, and none of them ever have published a elongation greater than 100%. And why does that matter? So we talked about elongation is how much can it stretch. To qualify as elastomeric, as we originally discussed the definition, the minimum standard we were able to find is that it would have to be capable of stretching to 2 times its size, which is an elongation of 100% minimum, and then go back to its original shape at room temperature. The elongation of modified bitumen does not even meet 100%, meaning that modified bitumen cannot stretch 2 times its size, period. It's not about whether or not it retains its original shape. It doesn't even reach that criteria. It can't stretch enough to even test if it's elastomeric. Even the most flexible brands that I've ever been able to find, the ones containing the highest SBS contents, never mind all their other faults, the stretchiest of them all does not reach 100% elongation. Therefore, it can't qualify as elastomeric under the definition of can it stretch to 2 times its size, which is the basic, most agreed upon definition, is its ability to stretch. But let's look at that to the next portion. Another portion is about being able to retain its original size after being deformed. Stretching was the first, most basic way to look at it. But another one is if you were to take, a nice thick piece of it, can you put pressure on it, not an extreme, but a reasonable amount of pressure, and it will resume back to its original shape. Anybody that's worked with modified bitumen for a lot of years knows that if while you're stepping on it, you apply too much weight downward, you can cause that modified bitumen to compress itself. Even when you haven't heated it, just on a normal, 60, 70 degree day, if you're walking on it wrong, you can compress the materials down and they will not resume their original shape. So if you were to take any piece of modified bitumen, even before it's installed, and you were to apply enough pressure to it, it's not going to bounce back. It just doesn't do that. That would be another standard. In fact, it's a standard that they have actually tested in laboratories. And there's laboratory testing from Siplast themselves about, can the modified bitumen return its original shape? Does it have some elastomeric properties? And in order to get it to do so, they had to heat it up over 300 degrees. The standard for elastomeric would require that to be heated no more than room temperature. It would never, ever apply to anything over 150 degrees, let alone 300. And so it doesn't qualify on its ability to return to its natural shape after being compressed, and it doesn't apply after being stretched. If you've ever taken a piece of modified, even modified without granules, take the base modified and roll it up into a ball, it doesn't even go back to its natural shape. You can take that flat piece, roll it into a ball, and it will not go back to being a flat piece. That doesn't apply a lot of heat. You can do that with your bare hands if you're just willing to spend a little bit of time on it. It does not return to that natural shape. And so under no condition, under no definition that's widely accepted or even moderately accepted by us, even a decent portion of the community, can modified bitumen be called elastomeric. And now where that confusion comes from is that elastomeric, by certain brands, I'm not going to name too many of them, but let's just say that Home Depot loves them, overuse the term elastomeric to the point where a lot of roofers have actually come to believe that the word elastomeric is a component, not a description. Like, saying acrylic coating contains acrylics, or saying rubber contains rubber, kind of thing. That's literally how bad it is. Elastomeric is a property. It isn't a ingredient. And people misunderstand that because of all the elastomeric coatings out there. I've heard it all the time. Well, you can get an acrylic or you can get an elastomeric. Most acrylics are elastomeric by definition, because the coatings are designed to stretch and then return to their natural state. Elastomeric is a property, is what it boils down to, and it is a property that cannot be used to describe modified bitumen under any widely accepted definition. The other portion where people mistake this, we talked about this earlier with my water example, is because the very, very, very beginning of the word was widely used as a reference to a property of rubber materials, to the point where people started to think that elastomeric meant rubber and that rubber meant elastomeric. Not a very widely accepted definition, but you got the people who weren't very scientific using it a lot. It's kind of like how a lot of people hear the word rubberized and assume that means rubber or contains rubber, thinking that it means that it is rubber, is the perfect example, because that's literally what's happening. People have confused the fact that SBS contains a portion of a compound that compound is in itself elastomeric, but when combined with the other ingredients, the final result generally isn't. The other flip side of that equation is that, like I said earlier, some of the adhesives, mostly for cold app, but some of the adhesives used can qualify as elastomeric, but never the membrane itself.